The Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. Now after he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went out and told those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After this, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking into the country. And they went back and told the rest, but the disciples would not believe them. Later, he appeared to the 11 disciples as they were sitting at table, and he upbraided them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. And he said to them, "Go into the world and proclaim the good news to the whole of creation. The one who believes and is baptized will be saved, but the one who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. By using my name, they will cast out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes in their hands, and if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Please join me in prayer. O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in you, our rock and redeemer. Amen. In a month in which LSTC is celebrating Asian and Pacific Islander cultures, we begin with a story of Shakuntala Devi. Born in 1929 and having passed away on this very day in 2013, Shakuntala Devi was, according to Wikipedia, an Indian mathematician, a writer and mental calculator who was popularly known as the human computer. She was so gifted that her mathematical talent earned her a place in the 1982 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records, something that ran counter to gender stereotypes in many parts of the world at this time. But we should also know that today is World Creativity and Innovation Day, and what an Easter-themed day that is to celebrate. According to one website, this day seeks to raise awareness about the role of creativity and innovation in human development, and indeed, Shakuntala Devi does not disappoint. Devi wrote as many as 20 books in her lifetimes on such diverse topics as mathematics, puzzles, cooking, astrology, and she even wrote a number of fictional novels. If Shakuntala Devi were a Western white male, she might be labeled as a Renaissance personality among the likes of Leonardo da Vinci and others. But as you probably know, just because we offer ideas of creativity and innovation does not always mean they will be welcomed or noticed. For instance, one of the texts that Shakuntala Devi wrote in 1977 was a book entitled The World of Homosexuals, which is considered the first academic study of gays in India. Contrary to many other books on the topic at this time, she saw gays and lesbians in a positive light. In the documentary For Straights Only, she said that her interest in this topic was because of her marriage to a gay man. And though they divorced in 1979, at the time she had a strong desire to look at the gay community more closely and to understand it. This book is considered pioneering for its day because it features interviews with 2 young Indian gay men, a male couple in India seeking legal marriage, and a temple priest who explains their views on this topic. And there's also a review of existing literature on gay and lesbian issues. According to the Wikipedia site, Shakuntala Devi ends this book with a call for the decriminalization of homosexuality in India and for a full and complete acceptance, not just tolerance and sympathy, of gays and lesbians. Unfortunately, this book went mostly unnoticed at the time. Wait a second, does this theme of being mostly unnoticed seem familiar? Let's jump over into today's gospel reading. In this text, we find ourselves following the lived experience of Mary Magdalene as it's described in today's version of the Gospel of Mark. Now, the first thing that you should know is that this is not the same Mary who's often associated with being a prostitute. That misogynistic confusion didn't likely happen until later in Christian history. Now, some of the commentaries on this passage have a tendency to focus on the now well-established fact that this second ending of Mark was added at a later time in Christian history. But what I want to focus on here today is Mary Magdalene's lived experience as the first evangelism of the resurrection according to this story. It's an evangelization that, unfortunately, as the story goes, is mostly unnoticed by some of the disciples. Now, I believe it's important to note the intersectional social location of Mary Magdalene, as it might help to shed some more light on why Mary's evangelization efforts went mostly unnoticed. We know that she was a woman in a patriarchal society, and it's reported in multiple Gospels and in multiple places that this was a person whom Jesus had cast out 7 demons from. I want to pause here because historians from the disability rights community have been able to establish that mental illness and other mental health issues have been sometimes labeled as being demonic in Western cultures. So it's possible that this Mary lived with a significant mental disability for at least part of her life. Other than this, we don't know a whole lot about Mary Magdalene. Was she Jewish? If so, she was from a marginalized ethnicity and religious tradition within the Roman Empire. What socioeconomic status or class was she from? According to the Gospel, Luke in chapter 8, it lists Mary as being one of many whom helped to provide support for Jesus' ministry, so she could have been from among the wealthier classes. So intersectionally speaking, Mary Magdalene may have had a mix of both marginalizations and privileges in her social location. However, Mary's social location, even with its privileges, obviously was not one that lended itself to being noticed or believed by the disciples according to this passage. For rather than being present to and believing Mary's own lived experience as a mostly marginalized woman, a disabled woman of color within the Roman Empire, the disciples are depicted in a very predictable way, by following a pattern that perpetuates racism, sexism, and ableism in society. So what happens next? How does the Christ respond? Jesus, hampered by this glaring intersectional marginalization within this now barely flickering and a newly emerging Christian movement, tries again with 2 other persons. Who were they? Perhaps others like Mary? Maybe they were outcasted, silenced, and mostly unnoticed by mainstream Greco-Roman and Jewish society. Perhaps they were Samaritans, slaves, or tax collectors, for we know these are the types of people that Jesus hung out with. Maybe they were trans, non-binary, lesbian, bisexual, or gay persons, for we know again and again that Jesus strove to build this ministry on the firm and reliable foundation of marginalized people whose daily labor, resilience, courageousness, and refusal to give up in situations of oppression were essential to the success of this fledgling and oppressed movement within the Roman Empire. And yet, the 11 disciples, who occupied more privileged and powerful positions as able-bodied males, would not believe her. They would not respond to God's life and love within and through Mary Magdalene and the 2 other evangelists of the resurrection. So Jesus appears directly to the other, upbraiding them for their lack of faith and stubbornness. For the Easter message had gone mostly unnoticed by them until Jesus showed up. And as you know, this gospel passage ends with one of the great commissionings in the Christian Testament, with Christ sending the disciples out into the world to do miraculous things, creative and innovative things. And today, we will be commissioning Drs. Perez Alvarez and Dr. Peterson. And indeed, all of us as Christians have been given the Great Commission to continually work for change in our world. But will these commissionings lead to change? In the cases of Dr. Perez Alvarez and Dr. Peterson, I have no doubts their commissions have already led to changes at LSTC, and wonderful ones at that. So will our great commissionings lead us to respond to those in our society who have been not only mostly unnoticed, but also physically violated, economically exploited, and politically dominated? Tomorrow is Earth Day. What impact will our commissioning and evangelization efforts have on the environment? Will our Christ-commissioned efforts really lead to sustainable change in our communities and our world? Or will they go mostly unnoticed? Will we, when our intersecting positions of power and privilege, respond to those who are marginalized and work in solidarity with one another for change? Or will we ignore our power and privilege and allow persons and communities who are marginalized to continue to go mostly unnoticed or even worse in our society? I pray that on this day, inspired by a mentally disabled woman of color who preached resurrection on the first Easter morning and was anointed by Christ's Great Commission, that we too will work individually and collectively towards the family and creation of God to which we are all called. Indeed, in this Easter season, let us make it so. Amen.